Morning. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. It'll take a few minutes to let folks in.
Good morning. May I ask few questions? Can I have the recording of the video at the end of the?
The program will be recorded and distributed, correct? Yep.
Oh,
Yep. We'll cover all that.
okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. I appreciate you making the time for us today.
Yeah, looks like everybody's in.
You can check this.
Okay, shall we get started? All right, great. Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to the Cybersecurity for Home Care and Hospice Providers virtual forum. We thank you for sharing your time with us today. This forum is presented by the New York State Association of Healthcare Providers, Home Care Association of New York State, and the Hospice and Palliative Care Association of New York State.
Bring our slides up.
Yep, I'm just getting that.
Thank you.
I'll hold for those.
People are still jumping in anyway.
Okay. There we go.
Thank you, Billy.
You're
I'm
welcome.
just going to go back a little bit just to make sure, because we've had some late joiners. I want to make sure everyone's up to speed. So this is the Cybersecurity for Home Care and Hospice Providers virtual forum. Next slide. And the presentation is brought to you by the New York State Association of Healthcare Providers, the Home Care Association of New York State, and the Hospice and Palliative Care Association of New York State. Next slide. First, we're going to take care of some housekeeping issues. And one is the use of AI recording or note-taking is prohibited. If you could kindly disable that function if you're using it, that would be appreciated. Second, please mute your audio. We ask that every time, but thank you so much for doing so. And third, time has been scheduled for questions and answers. Feel free to enter questions in the monitored chat box for discussion later. And lastly, slides and recording of this program will be made available. Next slide. It is important to acknowledge that the project was supported by the Department of Health and Human Services Administration for Strategic Preparedness and Response. Its content is solely the responsibility of the authors and does not necessarily represent the official views of the Department of Health and Human Services Administration for Strategic Preparedness and Response. This Emergency Preparedness Forum was made possible by a grant from the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, Office of Emergency Preparedness and Response. A special thank you to Fidel Monroe, Senior Program Manager, Long-Term Care, Bureau of Healthcare and Community Readiness, Office of Emergency Preparedness and Response. She's part of the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. Next slide. Today's forum will feature a panel of subject matter experts in the field of cybersecurity and will focus on awareness, risk mitigation strategies, emergency and incident response planning, recovery strategies, and upcoming regulatory changes specific to the home care and hospice sectors. Resources for prevention and management of cybersecurity issues will be provided. Next slide. Introductions. I'm Eva Cohen, Director of Regulatory and Community Affairs at the Hospice and Palliative Care Association of New York State, and my colleagues from the Home Care Association will introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Mel Cardillo. I'm the president and CEO of the Home Care Association of New York State and our charitable affiliate, HCA Education and Research. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Rebecca Gray, the Executive Vice President for Clinical and Program Affairs for the Home Care Association of New York State, and welcome you to today's program.
I'd like to now introduce Fidel Monroe. She has such a long title. I'm just going to call her right now the Senior Program Manager for Long-Term Care in the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. Ms. Monroe works closely with the home care and hospice sectors in New York City. She helps strengthen our emergency preparedness capabilities and supports continuity of healthcare delivery during and after disasters and emergencies. We are thankful to have her as our partner there, and we have requested that Fidel say a few words to open our forum.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here. I'm Fidel Monroe, as I've just stated, and I'm the Home Care and Hospice and Palliative Care Liaison for Long-Term Care Emergency Preparedness at the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, specifically in the Office of Emergency Preparedness and Response and in the Bureau of Health Care and Community Readiness. What does my bureau do? My bureau supports the New York City healthcare system to respond safely and effectively in emergencies. How do we do this? We align much of our work with the healthcare preparedness capabilities driven by the Department of Health and Human Services Administration for Strategic Preparedness and Response, which is referred to as ASPR. I've previously given you some insight into how ASPR's funding dollars make events like today's forum possible, and how these dollars allow us to focus our efforts on building and maintaining a prepared health system, advancing the developments of the New York City Healthcare Coalition, of which home care and hospice and palliative care sectors are members. The funding dollars also strengthen regional coordination, ensuring the healthcare system can maintain operations and surge to provide acute medical care during all hazards emergencies. But today, I'd like to pivot to the flip side of the coin, away from the big picture to the pixels that the big picture is created from, and the relevance of today's presentation to the uninterrupted services that you strive to provide to your clients daily, allowing them to remain safely in their homes. I'd like to walk you along one of the many paths that has been laid for you to mitigate interruptions in service to your clients. In the years 2022 and 2023, the Home Care and Hospice Associations, in conjunction with the New York City Department of Health, conducted emergency management needs assessment, and the respective sectors, most of you, 50% of you, if I remember correctly, in your survey response, requested information and educational resources on cybersecurity. Hence, those findings became a mandate as such to provide you with the educational tools that will increase your knowledge on the topic of cybersecurity, which is even more important today than it was in previous years. Today's presentation provides resources that can assist you to create and update your plans and procedures. But after today's experts have provided you with a place to begin assessing where your agency is, what's next? What are your next steps? Where can you obtain the help your agency may require with writing those comprehensive emergency plans? How can you exercise those plans? In other words, test them to see if they work. The health department, the New York City Health Department, has proactively thought of those needs that you may have, and we have contracted with Incident Management Solutions, IMS, as they're referred to facilitate the long-term care comprehensive emergency management training and technical assistance program. This program will provide you with the individualized assistance in assessing, creating, and updating your agency's plans. Then to test those plans, IMS also conducts the long-term care exercise program, which provides sector-specific training and exercises which encompass many scenarios, such as a cybersecurity breach, testing those plans. I've just provided you with some of the pixels that make up the big picture that can translate into safely maintaining your clients in their homes and their communities, thus minimizing unnecessary strain or burden on our healthcare system, ensuring that the system can maintain operations to provide acute medical care. So you told us cybersecurity breaches were a concern. You identified the gap. We heard you and gathered a group of cybersecurity experts to address your concerns and answer your questions. Individualized technical assistance is available to assist you with writing those plans to address the gap that you identified and at no cost to you. Testing those plans through training and exercise is also provided. This forum will bring you the information that is an accompaniment to free programming being provided by the New York City Department of Health in conjunction with your host associations. So, ladies and gentlemen, availing yourselves to participating in offerings such as today's event is how together we work to close the gaps that you have identified in your respective sectors. Thank you to the panelists for being here to share their expertise today. On behalf of the New York City Health Department, please allow me to welcome all attendees to the second Home Care and Hospice Forum of 2025, especially to the home care and hospice representatives, and acknowledge that the healthcare system in New York City has strengthened with the addition of your sectors to the New York City Healthcare Coalition, which continues to grow stronger because of your involvement and feedback. We would not be able to do what we do if it were not for your agencies collaborating with us on these important emergency preparedness initiatives. And if you've heard me before, you would have heard me say, it is our continued hope that your participation in our offerings allows you to take from the experiences of others and incorporate lessons learned into your own emergency planning. Here's to you. Have an awesome summer, everyone. Thank you. Over to you, Carol.
Thank you, Fidel. That was a really good overview of what we've been working on the last few years and what we're continuing to work on. And what we will do is try to get those links for folks to sign up for the emergency management or the long-term care exercise program and technical assistance. I can put those in the chat for folks as we go along with today's program. So I am Carol Dio. I'm a registered pharmacist and Director of Regulatory Affairs and Special Programs at HCP. I'm responsible for our emergency management grant activities with both the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene and the New York State Department of Health Office of Emergency Management. Through these grants, all of these associations educate and inform the entire spectrum of home and community-based providers. As a reminder, we will have time for panelist Q&A after our final presenter is finished. So please type your questions into the chat, and that way the moderators can organize them for our experts to address at the end. And now I'm thrilled to introduce you to our panel of experts. If I could have the next slide, please. We do want to note that unfortunately, the panelists representing the Federal Bureau of Investigation had to withdraw from speaking here today due to changes in FBI guidelines regarding speaking engagements. We have today, I'm going to go out of order on your screen. Justin Bain from VNS will talk about important upcoming regulatory changes for home and community-based providers, including the proposed HIPAA rules. Crystal Wilson from the National Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, you know it as CISA. Crystal has recently returned from being deployed with the National Guard, and we thank her for her service, and we're so happy she's able to be with us here today. Crystal plans to share a treasure trove of valuable free resources you can access immediately after the program. We're also sad to report that Dennis Ast, that had planned to speak from one group, will not be here today due to unexpected family obligations. However, Dennis O'Connell will be presenting his material addressing insurance, risk mitigation, and physical cybersecurity. Which brings me to Dennis O'Connell, who in his presentation will discuss disaster recovery, cloud migration, and so much more. So I'd like to introduce you to Dennis O'Connell. Dennis is the Director of Security Solutions at Custom Computer Specialists. With over 30 years of experience in technology, Dennis specializes in the development and design of data security solutions, specifically for healthcare facilities across the United States. Dennis has authored numerous articles about cybersecurity best practices and is a recognized subject matter expert. We're honored to have him here with us to share his expertise. We're especially grateful again for him stepping in to help out with Mr. Ast's presentation. Thank you, Dennis. Take it away.
Thank you, Carol. What a great program we've got going here today. Unfortunately, Dennis is not available. Dennis asked. This has happened in the past where I became unavailable at the last minute. So we've done numerous conferences like this together. So I am not an insurance expert, but I've done enough of these with him that I can get us most of the way through this. If there are any other questions, I would invite us to reach out to Dennis after the meeting and get a little more detail. He is a great resource to lean on as you navigate the ever-changing insurance industry. So I'll talk a little bit, what are we seeing out there in the industry and the news these days? I mean, just last year in the healthcare industry alone, there were 458 major breaches / ransomware attacks, ranging from Change Healthcare to Ascension Healthcare. Change Healthcare, a division of Optum, was a very large one, affecting millions and millions of clients, impacted the delivery of care because they couldn't get insurance approvals, impacted the ability for organizations to get paid. It was, it was very, very bad. And I say major breaches, 458. I'll give you an example of just last week, I had one of my clients, a threat actor was trying to penetrate one of their external servers. Our security operations center caught it. The software stopped it and gave us notifications. And while they're constantly being under attack, that's not a breach. These are, the 458 are major shutdowns by organizations. I think the other thing of note here is the PayPal fine. They were fined this was a civil fine. What they found was that their security controls were insufficient to protect the data, and they came after them with civil penalties. We're seeing a bit more of this now, particularly in organizations that may not be attesting to the security controls that they have as they're applying for insurance, and then they're kind of getting caught after it, which is, technically a felony. So, next slide, please. So, quick facts with what we're seeing out there right now from Arctic Wolf. The largest attack vector for getting into networks is email, leveraging people making mistakes and clicking on bad links or downloading files that may have malicious content inside of it. Roughly a third of the breaches are out there are ransomware or extortion. I'll go a little more detail, a little more on the other breakdowns later. Per the Verizon data breach investigation report, threat actors are 70% internal and 30% external. So malicious employees, I've seen this a number of times, people making mistakes and opening up servers and maybe shutting down antivirus temporarily because things are running slow. So one attack up in Massachusetts where an email administrator, the email was running slow, so we shut off the antivirus on that email server, and the threat actors were already in the network and exploited that shutdown to fully take over the network. When I say fully take over the network, they took over the phone system, they took over the network, they took over the servers and the workstations and shut everything down. The company was in full diversion for 3 days, and diversion, for people that may not know what that is ambulances are no longer going to the healthcare organization. They're going to neighboring organizations so they can get the care that they need. And when I say that they were in there, on the average, it takes a business 277 days to identify and contain a breach. What I've seen over, and I'll talk about it a little more later, they're in there a long time. 6 months is not out of the ordinary or more, where a threat actor is in the network, kind of poking around, figuring out how they're going to maximize damage. And when I say maximize damage, I've seen, where an organization was shut down and the principals of the organization said they don't have enough money to pay the ransomware. And then they get an email from the threat actors with their financial statement and showing they do have the ability to pay. So there's not much negotiation going on. So they're in there definitely trying to attack and figure out how they can maximize what they're doing. And at the end of the day, it's mostly the human element that's continue to drive breaches. 68 of them are the human element, whether it's a misconfiguration, whether it's a misunderstanding of what the risk and exposure is, or just the end user clicking on a bad link, or IT not understanding how systems are being backed up and if they can be restored. And that really kind of magnifies what, how bad a breach could be. Next slide. Healthcare trends, what we're seeing, a lot of miscellaneous errors contributing to seeing servers misconfigured as a result of COVID. I've seen a lot of organizations going to remote access, and they've put up servers quickly without the improper controls. And, it's just an error that the bad guys are able to exploit. Privilege misuse is growing again. What privilege misuse is, give an example, a nursing home, actually a series of nursing homes, the administrator used the same account for his backup, for his server credentials. He didn't use an individual. So when his credentials were compromised, so was everything else. And the backup was deleted. So when it came time to try and restore the organization, we didn't have anything to restore from. We had to go and pay the ransomware. So, next slide. So think of cyber insurance as a resource. One, it's financial protection. It transfers the risk or shares the risk if you get a good policy. But some of the things like we talked about a little bit earlier, but vulnerability assessments, training, incident response templates, cybersecurity experts, active monitoring. I know my organization here, because of our SOC compliance and everything, we've got our insurance company also monitoring the inside of our network for attacks. So it's an extra set of eyes for us. We do pay for the service, but it's a good first-class service that they offer. In addition to the resources that you're going to get, previously mentioned, these are also really good resources. And why I say talking to Dennis is a good resource going forward for figuring out where your insurance might be good or bad. Next slide. So cyber insurance is a rapidly changing industry. You can think back, 10 years ago when they started to put riders on insurance policies to cover for cyber incidents. Boy, the insurance companies got killed because the ransomware grew and grew. The organizations were not in a good place to protect themselves. It's gotten bad, and they've gotten a lot more intense with what they're doing. When I say intense, in many respects, aside from regulations, which Justin will talk about later, these guys are driving, the implementation of security controls. And every year, a smaller organization has to act a lot more like a large organization. When I say a large organization, so, most of you, I'm sure, have heard of Northwell Health, 70, 80,000 employees. They have the money to implement some really intense security controls. What I'm seeing now on whether it's a cyber assessment by the insurance company or independent auditor, or just the insurance company itself, they're asking questions, the same questions of organizations of your size that they're requiring of the large organizations. And Justin will go into a lot of this, but the idea of controlling access, not only knowing who's going into the network, but also knowing what type of computer it is and making sure it's a trusted computer versus another computer. So it's it's driving compliance and cybersecurity to a huge degree. Unfortunately, it adds a fair amount of expense, because if you don't have the controls that they're looking for in place, they may not write you, or your policy might be significantly more expensive than you otherwise might get. So one thing to be aware of, you want to do regular audits of your cybersecurity. So as they're getting smarter, they are also limiting their liability. For instance, if you respond that you have encrypted computers, but it's found that the computers were not all encrypted and the breach happens, they can, not pay you. So what I've seen very often, probably in half of the breaches that we dealt with last year, it became a negotiation with the insurance company to try and get them to cover everything that the policy owners thought that they had. And it really becomes a tough battle to try and get as much money as you think you want, because these breaches are very, very expensive. Next slide, please. So types of claims, talk a little bit ransomware. Business email compromise is huge. That's usually the first way that they're getting into the network. Funds transfer fraud is an interesting one. Give you an example of responded. A law firm brought me into a retail organization. They had 7 locations, looking to open up an 8th one in Florida. The CEO's down in Florida looking for locations. The CFO is up here in New York. All of a sudden, the CFO gets an email saying, transfer $100,000 to this bank because I found a great location. And so he did. Didn't think twice of it, and then this happened 6 more times. And, and these guys weren't talking, but, a couple of things here. One, the bad guys were in the network. They knew they were looking for a place. They were able to spoof the email and, make it look like the owner. And, they got $600,000 payments. After the investigation, we found it may have been a former employee. And this kind of gets back to the idea of the internal actors are in there. And FBI got involved. At the end of the day, the insurance company only paid the first $100,000 because they said that the other 5 payments were an extension of the first breach. So these guys are out $500,000 in addition to what they were paying for their cyber. So it's, again, understand your policy so that you can understand your exposure. Talk to Dennis. I also review policies regularly for my clients to see what there may or may not be missing and make sure that they are checking all the right boxes on their assessments. Next slide, please. So again, start the renewal process pretty early. Ask the broker for cyber assessment. What vulnerabilities do they have? So that they're outsourced with companies that will scan your networks. Multi-factor email, remote privilege access. These are all controls that they're looking for right now. You can't get without encrypt. You probably can't get a policy now without encryption, without multi-factor authentication. Privilege access. I used the example before of the IT director having the same password for his backup and for his servers. What they're looking for now is privilege access management, meaning that only XYZ person with XYZ privileges can make these changes on there. So what that allows you to do is minimize how a threat actor might be able to take over an account and actually try and impact change on the network. So very intense. I see the largest organizations putting it, but that's now trickling down to smaller organizations of 100 people or less. Implement EDR, endpoint detection and response. I talked about this a little bit earlier when there was a threat actor trying to get into a server that was internet facing. Well, we had electronic detection and response on there that, 1, stopped them, and 2, notified us that this strange action was going on. And then we were able to go in there and further modify things to lock things down more. So critical now. Antivirus is not enough. This is pretty much the standard these days. Talked about the human element earlier. So increasing email security and phishing training, whether you do it internally yourself or you outsource it to an organization like myself, where we'll put a program together and report results and recommend training for people. It's critical because this is the easiest way to get into a network. Having a regular patching cadence is critical. Also having updated equipment. I would say 3/4 of the breaches that we dealt with last year were the result of old equipment that should have been replaced, meaning that it's end of sale, end of life, and end of support by the manufacturer. And what those last 2 mean is that they are not patching systems for known vulnerabilities. So I did an assessment for someone a few years ago, and the owner of the organization responds to me after telling me, you've got all these places that are, real risks. And his response was, well, this equipment is so old, they've forgotten how to hack it. Not true. He got taken down in a big way and nearly went out of business. And that's since upgraded everything. Encrypt everything is common sense these days. Encrypt the servers, encrypt the workstations, encrypt the traffic going up to whether it be Google Cloud or Microsoft 365. Cybersecurity awareness program, as well as cyber incident response. And we kind of talked at the beginning about cyber incident response. It's necessary. It's a requirement now. And most of the organizations I worked with did not have anything. So we had to figure out everything from the ground up. How is the network configured? Where did they get in? How do they do it? And just flying by the seat of your pants based upon our previous experience, but we had to pull the customer along and it made everything twice as hard, maybe more. Next slide, please. I think on the last slide, it just saw I'm cut off a little bit here, but having backup and testing the backup is critical. And I've seen numerous times where the backup gets locked down, and or recognizing how long it actually takes to restore a backup. It can take days or weeks, depending on how much data is stored there, to get a backup up and running. So as you're doing your cyber risk assessment plan, you want to categorize applications and or functions by a priority. So you might be bringing in priority 1 first, but you can get those restored in 24 to 48 hours. And then priority 2 might be, a week, and priority 3 might be a month per se, because you can't get everything all done all at once. So cyber insurance is different these days than 20 years ago. I think we talked about this earlier. Cyber policy versus an endorsement, kind of critical to go to a cyber policies these days. They're not all created equal. Different controls, different exclusions, different things that you have to put in place. So you really need to understand what your risk is and what your tolerance is. Admitted versus non-admitted, and that's describing the type of insurance company. An admitted insurance company is regulated by New York State and has to conform to those regulations. A non-admitted is not necessarily regulated, and they can be more flexible in writing a policy because they might be willing to take on more risk than the guys that are admitted. So you want to understand what kind of insurance company you're dealing with. Claim reporting, this is part of your cyber incident response plan. Who you're calling, do they have a breach coach for you? And then pre-loss services. I think at the very beginning of the presentation talked about the various resources that are available to you. Many of these are also available through the insurance company in conjunction with the insurance company, whether it be phishing training, penetration testing, vulnerability testing. Some insurance companies will require it as part of the underwriting, or they'll provide free services for you to help you kind of get off the ground. Next slide, please. So other things to consider when taking a look at cyber insurance: third-party liability and first-party coverages and everything that is covered. And this is kind of a checklist of the first-party coverage of, these are the minimums you probably want. The third-party liability is something that often gets overlooked. I'll give you an example of Nuvance, a 5-hospital health system in Connecticut and Eastern New York. They had a breach of their fundraising software, Razor's Edge, and cost them millions, in the neighborhood of $2 million to get it under control and everything else. And the problem was that they took their entire patient database and moved it into Razor's Edge. So they had 1 million patients inside of Razor's Edge. So it was a major, major breach. They were only able to collect pennies because their sales agreement of the software limited the liability of Razor's Edge to what that organization would pay to Razor's Edge on a yearly basis to operate that software. So I think they got somewhere in the neighborhood of $50,000 in reimbursement, and they were on the hook for everything else. And they did not have a third-party liability override on their insurance. So something to kind of think. I give another example. Many of you using probably using cloud-based services to deliver care. 2 years ago, I want to say 800 nursing homes were shut down because that cloud service company that was servicing their EMR got shut down by a cyber attack. And they only had $10 million in cyber insurance, and they wanted 14, and they couldn't negotiate it down, and they went out of business. So now all these 800 organizations had to go out and do everything manually until they could sign up with a new hosted EMR. So you want to understand what your risks are. One is, can you get covered by insurance? And two, can you actually get access to your data in the event of a cyber attack, and how might you do that? Can you download your data, whether it be to a PDF or some other way that you can actually continue care for people? Something to kind of think about as you do your risk assessment. Next slide. Best practices. You're all going to get a copy of this. I'm not going to dig into much, but email and phishing, you have to take care of that. Multi-factor, I talked about a little bit. Full data backup, encrypt, air gap, and test. I think regulations now in New York State as of last year, you're supposed to have a disaster recovery plan. And that includes assessing your backup and how quickly you can restore. There might be backups that are stored in a cloud that you can spin up within a couple of hours that are insulated from cyber attacks. So something to take a look at as you do your risk assessment. Patching is key. Password managers are getting very common, using like a password safe. EDR, we talked about a little bit. Encrypting data, taking a look at third-party contracts and setting up favorable contracts. Put a security incident response program together and test it, even if it's just a dry test, and you make believe that you're getting attacked, and involve senior management as well. That's critical that everyone's on board and understands. The fund transfer I talked about a little bit earlier. One, the CEO and the president didn't talk about this stuff, and it went on for a couple of weeks. And two, the CFO had him set up twice as the dual authenticator with the bank for transferring large sums of money, which is a big no-no. So that was another thing as you examine your practices on funds transfer. You have to make sure there's perhaps you need a second control for doing things like that. Next slide. And this is me. All right, next
There
slide.
you are, Dennis O'Connell.
There we are.
Thanks.
So I'm gonna flip a little bit away from insurance. And hey, Justin, you want to add anything about insurance before I kind of jump into this? Any experiences from your side?
Everything that you said about the requirements around insurance is absolutely true. I think that it's getting more and more challenging even to find an underwriter that you can afford, and that's coming from us, which we're a larger provider in health plan. So it's becoming more the questions that we get asked from a security perspective. Each year, the list gets longer and longer, and the expectations are higher and higher. And you're absolutely right on every one of those items that you listed.
Yeah, good. Yeah, it's unfortunately, cyber is the one thing where the end user gets penalized. With anything, it's really strange, whether it be civil penalties or the insurance or not getting reimbursed. From insurance perspective, it's tough right now to get ready. So great, thanks, Justin. So I'm going to go into get a little more technical, talk about an actual quasi incident. I've done bench exercises with clients. I've done we've taken a look at their incident response program, kind of done testing it out. But what I thought I'd do here is give you kind of a feel for what the first 6 months feels like after a breach. And the timing of it. So I'll dig into that a little bit. But first, a couple observations. A little background on my company. We're a mid-sized organization, about 450 employees. We support several hundred organizations in the Mid-Atlantic, Ohio, and Northeast. Last year alone, we worked and did restoration and forensics for 19 major attacks, impacting nearly 20,000 computers. And they tend to happen in bunches for some reason. And some of them were existing clients that just had bad controls in place. Others were brand new clients that came to us for help. Organizations are constantly under attack. I touched on this a little bit earlier, but phishing, old systems, finding holes against old systems, misconfiguration and patching. I used a couple examples of those before. And then remote desktop services has been a big attack vector as it came about mostly because of COVID and needing to get people access to internal systems when they're working remotely. Unfortunately, if it's not implemented properly with the right controls, it is wide open and is a great attack vector for getting into organizations. So it's worth kind of reviewing that either with an assessor or an IT guy like myself to see how exposed you might be. In every single attack, the threat actors were in there for months, minimum of 6, trying to figure out how they can exploit the network, how they can maximize what they're doing. Saw in 2 incidents, there were 2 different threat actors in there when we did the forensics. So one guy dropped his payload before the other guy got a chance to figure out what he wanted to do. And should knock them both out, but it's not uncommon for many people to be attacking the vulnerable systems. And most places did not have a cyber/disaster recovery plan because they always thought it was, it's not going to be me. And it's really made things tough. There are things you have to do to restore an organization, and it is pretty tough to get there. Next slide. Okay, on the defensive side, and a lot of this is tied to insurance requirements, but I've seen, a lot of, going from just encrypting laptops and maybe your phones to encrypting every device as well as the servers. Multi-factor has been around for a while, mostly for remote access, but now they're doing multi-factor for network access coming in through VPN and or for administrators that are working on computers or the networks or the firewalls, using multi-factor for them to do a challenge and response that is not a threat actor inside the network. It is that physical person actually doing it. And I've seen a lot more of that implemented in the last year or so. And that's being driven a lot by insurance. Servers, backup and network encryption, multi-factor again. See multi-factor being used on backups now, so the backups can't get overwritten. Privilege access management, which is the interrogation of people going onto the network and or the cloud of, is it Dennis? Is it Dennis's laptop or is it not Dennis's laptop? And do we want to give them restricted access if Dennis has access to the network? So seeing a lot of that as well as controlling the very serious passwords. And then I've seen a shift, and this is regulatory, a shift from backup systems to disaster recovery systems. And the critical thing for me here is a disaster recovery system might be, think of it as a standby data center that you can spin up that is semi-air gapped or encrypted or has controls in place that can prevent a threat actor from getting into that backup and or disaster recovery and starting it back. So I see and it costs almost the same when you compare a cloud cost versus cloud cost, and it's definitely worthwhile to be able to spin things up. And in the cloud, I've seen a lot of multi-factor, privileged access management, and backup. And I say backup in the cloud, one would be, let's say, for an EMR type system, how can you back it up? How can you get access to data if something happens there? Or even Google Workspace or Office 365. Seeing a lot of people backing that up because both of those vendors don't necessarily guarantee that they're going to be able to restore systems that have become corrupted, however they might be able to become corrupted. So having a backup of your external systems is top of mind these days with organizations. Next slide. So typical attack prior to 3 to 6 months, network compromised, threat actor gains knowledge, victim to prepare for the attack. Day 1, systems usually compromised. Usually a Friday or when key people are unavailable. And I say key people, I had one attack where the network director was in California as opposed to New York. So they flew them back, lost all the vacation money and everything else. So, the company, paid them back for it, but they know when you're going to be most exposed. But usually the ransom is delivered. Day 3, everyone tries to contain it. can I get it back up? Do I have everything working? Assess the damage, notifying the cyber insurance company, exchange external organizations to help with forensics and remediation. Typically, when we're responding to a large breach, we can't do it all alone. I don't have people sitting around doing nothing all day long to respond to a breach. I think one with I want to say it was about 800 computers. There were 5 organizations that were in there. So the insurance company brought in a forensics company. They brought in us for doing desktop remediation. They brought another company for doing network remediation. They brought another company for doing server remediation. And we all had to kind of work in conjunction with each other to try and get things up running as quickly as you can. So as you're doing your cyber incident response, you might want to find secondary and tertiary companies that you might be able to engage should something go bad. Next slide. Weeks 1 to 2, typically you build a whole new network, whether it's on their existing infrastructure or on new infrastructure that is a clean network that is virus-free or ransomware-free. And then you start to take server images for forensics examination. You start to take, desktop images to find out, where it is, what the payload, and how you go about cleaning it. You move the systems as they get clean and or new systems into the new network. So when you start to bring services back up, you've got a clean network that you can work with. If there's no incident response plan, what typically happens is you identify and you rank what applications and what the criticality and what the return to use needs to be. And then you start to prioritize them. And typically, you're also going to buy new servers and workstations because it's costs almost the same to buy a new workstation as it does to rebuild one because it takes forever. So, next slide. Remediation, months 2 to 6. Secondary systems are identified, prioritized, plans put in place to bring them back online. Computers are reimaged and replaced. New security tools are put in place to prevent future attacks. This is a month after the incident. We're still in response mode. We're not getting ahead of it yet. So, next slide. So, typically after 6 months, things start to settle down. You start to do a review of attack. You review your systems, your tools, your people, your processes leading up to the attack. You review the incident response or remediation. You identify security gaps. You typically go out and buy a whole bunch of new security tools to kind of prevent it from happening again. And this is kind of where you get to, you take, where you did that identification of the criticality of the applications. Well, you take that, you take it up to a next level, understand it, understand what return to use looks like, and then you develop plans for post-incident. Developing new budgets for new technologies. You're not going to implement everything all at once. Typically, you're going to go over 1 or 2 years or 3 years to kind of ratchet up the security. So, next one. And I guess at the end, I want to get you thinking a little bit, all right, how prepared are you for an attack? And, as disaster recovery practitioners, who I think most of the people are here, you got one, you're aware, 2, you want to test it, 2, you want to, test it constantly. But you want to ask yourselves from a maturity level, and I've seen 5-level plans here, but I kept it real simple. Maturity level 1, I've got a plan in my head. Data's backed up, but restoration is not really tested. And I don't know how long my business it will take to get it back up and running based upon what you have. And is everything backed up as you think it is? Like a level 2, I've done a risk assessment, my data's back up, and a restoration is tested. So you know about how long it takes to restore a critical server. And between yourselves and management, you determine whether it's acceptable or not. And level 3, you've done a risk assessment, you developed a plan, it's documented, it's tested periodically. Disaster recovery systems are in place and tested periodically. And you know how long it take to restore critical systems. And this is kind of an evolution here. And I think a lot of us are at various points on the spectrum. So, next slide. And that's it for me. Justin, anything you want to add?
No, but let's keep those maturity levels in mind because that's going to come up in my presentation too.
Okay.
Awesome. I've never seen it done that way. That was really interesting. And I do want to remind our providers that your emergency management plans, whether it's for cybersecurity or snowstorms or earthquakes or whatever hazard you're addressing, all of your plans need to be in hard copy in a binder. Because if you lose your computers, you lose your plan for everything else too. So that's according to the Department of Health, you have to have that in a binder. So thank you so much, Dennis. That was a lot. You covered two people's topics there. We really appreciate it. And now we're going to go on to Justin Bain. Justin leads the information security team at VNS Health. VNS Health has operated for over 130 years and has always been at the vanguard of home and community-based care, especially in New York City. Today, Justin brings us his 25 years of experience in post-acute healthcare technology, which he maximizes to lead the effort to protect information systems for providers and consumers, all while ensuring those systems are compliant with governmental regulations for this sector. Welcome, Justin, and I'll remind folks, put your questions in the chat because we are checking that periodically.
Thank you. So I'm going to be talking about the proposed updates to the HIPAA security rule. But first, I want to talk about the old HIPAA security rule that came out in 2004. I was just in the beginning of my career when this rule came out. It was important to because it was the first cybersecurity interface that I had, and in implementing that rule, it sparked something in me that led on to be my career. So it has been important to me, and I say all that just to say that I've been thinking about this rule for the past 20 years. So I have some opinions about these new regulations that have been proposed by OCR. HIPAA is it is enforced by the Office of Civil Rights at HHS. It was meant to be scalable. It was meant to be one size fits all, meaning that no matter if you were a small private practice or a huge hospital system, you would be able to follow the same rules. Over time, they brought in business associates to have to follow the same rule. But virtually the provisions of the rule and the requirements of it really haven't changed since 2004. And I am not a lawyer. This is just my opinion as a cybersecurity professional. But I do want to talk about some of these and what I think the impact is going to be on the provider space, the healthcare provider space, especially as we move into the rulemaking process. Now, the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, or NPRM, came out in, I think it was December 27th, in the Biden administration, and it was published on January 7th in 2025, and that started the 60-day comment period, which ended on March 7th. So this is pretty fresh in terms of coming out very recently. The last that I heard from a news report a few days ago, was that OCR is reading through the 4,000 comments that came through as part of the rulemaking process. I looked at some of the comments myself on their website. I can tell you that they all follow the theme that this is a huge administrative burden on providers. And I have to wholeheartedly agree, regardless of whether you're a large provider like VNS Health or a smaller one, there is going to be a burden here. And it's going to primarily be in the area of documentation. And we'll talk about that a little bit when we get to it. But what's the intention of this change? The new rules are really intended to strengthen the requirements of cybersecurity. We've heard about all of the issues here today that the industry is facing, all of the controls that we need to put in place, and our rules that govern this are from 2004, right? So we want to have stronger rules around this. And it makes sense that they update them and try to put in some of the more modern security controls for today. They also clarified on some of the terms that were either ill-defined, or perhaps were being interpreted in a wrong way in the original rule. So that a lot of those were good changes to the rule. And then they've added mandates, which we'll talk about in the next screen, for administrative changes and for technical changes. Much of which is really good, and I'm glad that they took the time to reconsider some of their language and how they interpret the rules. Most of the changes that they make around the language is intended to clarify and to and to make it so it's not such a question of how to follow the rule. You have clear direction, and I think that's good for both the regulators and the regulated entities. But ultimately, what this means is that there's going to be more documentation that's necessary. The documentation is probably my biggest complaint about the security rule changes that have been proposed. Throughout the proposed changes, there is an increase in documentation, increase in how long you have to keep the documentation, how detailed the documentation has to be. And for large and small, that's going to take a big hit. But I personally believe that documentation does not make your information any safer. It does not make your systems any safer. What it does do, however, is make it easy to investigate, and it makes it easy to audit, which is the jobs of OCR. And so in a way, by requiring this more documentation, they are making their jobs easier while making our jobs harder. Every dollar that we spend in working on this increased documentation is a dollar that could have been spent on something else that actually could have made a difference about the information security. So I suspect that, just like the rest of the comments that I saw, the industry is going to push back hard on this, and we're gonna try to get them to pull back on some of the documentation requirements. It's also going to require more planning, and the slides that we just previously saw, the planning that you need to do around disaster recovery and incident response. All those plans are already a requirement. That wasn't new, but the testing of those plans are going to need to be documented, and that's going to need to be available for display in the event of an investigation or an audit as well. So expect that. The biggest requirement, I think, is a audit requirement, an at least annual audit requirement. Now, I've worked at different size businesses over the years. I used to work for Mount Sinai about 8 years ago, and Mount Sinai, if you don't know, is a large hospital system in New York City. It's one of the largest employers in the city. It's 7 hospitals, 200 or so physicians' practices, and we had 0 IT auditors on staff, even with all those employees. So this is going to be a huge lift for a big organization, much less a small organization, and having to perform these audits. And now they do allow a little bit of room for how you perform the audits, but this is new, and it's going to be something that not all organizations can handle. And then, of course, they've added some stronger technical controls. I think that is really the meat of what is required here. I think that every stronger technical control that they're required is kind of just run-of-the-mill table stakes for today's environment. I don't think that there's anything added here that is unreasonable, but we'll get into the specifics of that a little bit more. And then, as I said, many comments have emphasized the burdensome impact on the industry. It's every single one that I looked at, and I only spot checked a few, but I tried to space them out so that I got a good sample. And everyone is up in arms about the administrative burden that it's going to bring. So if we go to the next page, we can talk a little bit about what that administrative burden is. Now, I've highlighted some things here. Again, these are directly from the fact sheet, simplified for the purposes of fitting on the slide. But what I'm going to be talking about is really my opinions, right? So the first thing is that they made no distinction between required versus addressable. They're all required. I would argue that they were always all required because you had to address them. If you didn't address them, then you weren't within the requirements of the original rule. But now they're explicitly all required. So anything that's prescriptive in the rule is a requirement of the rule with some limited exceptions, but it's no longer up to the organization to decide that. And then there's increased mandatory written documentations, PMPs, plans, and analyses. I mentioned that before. Everything is going to have to be documented. One example of the increased documentation is that say you have a system, an electronic medical record system, you need to document how in that system you are meeting the requirements of the security rule. Now that may be easy if you only have one system, but in my organization, we have dozens. We have 10 or 11 that we consider critical, and they're not small. They're all each huge systems with lots of configurations to them. Documenting out all of those to the letter rather than just having a policy and procedure that says what you do, that's a lot of work, and that's a lot of time that's going to be spent figuring that out and getting it all documented the way that they want it. So that's an example of the burden that we're talking about. They updated definitions and specifications for clarity. I think that, again, that those were good things that they needed to do. They created specific time periods for the existing requirements and for the new requirements. And we'll talk about some of those. The technology asset inventory and network map. Now, if you ask OCR, an asset inventory was always a requirement. It was just implied. We know this because we've seen their enforcement work, right? We've seen their enforcement work as they send out their notices of a settlement and what the issues were with that particular incident. And oftentimes they would mention that there was not an accounting of all of the assets. But now they've made it explicit. And that means that for a lot of organizations who haven't, who maybe have a loose organization of their inventory or perhaps don't have one, this is going to be a step up. And then there's the idea of a network map. And what they refer to as a network map is not really a drawing of your network as much as it is understanding how EPHI moves throughout your network. So if you get EPHI from an outside partner and how it flows through your network and through your assets on your network, and then when it leaves your network, how it gets out of your network and where does it go to, and understanding that. And they really want that so that when they come in and they are doing an investigation, they can just look at the map and understand how EPHI is moving, understand all of the systems that are involved. For a complicated, large organization, this is a pretty big undertaking because we may have, I was looking at all of the connections that we have for our health plan, and it's literally hundreds of connections that we have to map out now. The risk analysis was always a requirement. That's nothing new for healthcare organizations. We've been having to do this for 20 years, as I said. But now it's going to have to include this inventory, include the map, and consider threats along with vulnerabilities and the risk level. To be fair, they had been asking for threats in risk analysis previously, but now it's going to be explicitly a requirement, and so we should expect that. And what does that mean? It means you don't just consider, oh, what are my vulnerabilities? you have to think about, okay, what are my most likely threats? Things like ransomware, things like the business email compromise and phishing. Those are the highest areas. So we need to put in as part of our risk analysis how those specific threats will affect our calculation and what our risk score is. There is a requirement to notify certain regulated entities within 24 hours when a workforce member's access is terminated. So if you're a business associate to a covered entity and your business associate's employee works for that covered entity and has access to that covered entity's systems, they will need, if you fire this employee, or if they leave the organization, or even if they go on leave of absence, right? You need to notify within 24 hours to the covered entity. That's a pretty hard bar to get. I mean, 24 hours is not a lot of time if somebody quits on a Friday afternoon, right? So that's a new part of the law that we're going to have to work out if it actually turns into if it is actually adopted as part of the final rule. And then another administrative burden, I think, is the contingency planning and incident response planning, which we've been talking about, right? A 72-hour restoration. That means that from the time that your incident starts until the time that you are able to restore the services is 72 hours. That's a pretty quick turnaround. If you remember the Change Healthcare incident that happened in the beginning part of last year, that they were unable to restore services for 4 weeks. And they had all of the money and glory of United Health Group behind them in order to get their services restored. Now, that granted, they were very complicated network and had lots of clients all over the United States, but a 72 restoration is pretty ambitious, and that's probably going to require some investment and a lot of testing. And another requirement is that you test the plans, just like we talked about. If this proposed rule goes through, we're all going to need to be at that maturity level of 3, right? That third level of maturity on the previous slides, where we've tested the plans. We know how long it's going to take to restore, and we have it ready for us. I mentioned before, compliance audits every 12 months. This could be scalable, I guess. Everybody has to do some kind of audit, right? So maybe you can just tack it onto audits that you're already doing, but this certainly has not been a requirement in previous versions of the security rule. And the notification of contingency plans activation to group health plans within 24 hours. If you are a business associate to a health plan, which many providers are, you may have to notify that plan if you activate your contingency plan. And so if any reason your stuff goes down and you have to go to downtime procedures, you also are going to be required to notify health plans in the same amount of time. We can go to the next slide. This is my last slide. So I'm going through these slow because I knew I only had 3 slides. These are the technical changes. Again, I think that all of them are very smart and very much needed. Encryption required at rest and in transmit. That was already a requirement, but now it's explicitly required. And there's not going to be very many exceptions to this. You need to encrypt your EPHI wherever it is. They expanded the idea of identity to not just be people and humans, but also technology assets as well. So your mobile device, your computer. I don't think that this is going to allow for us to use unknown devices anymore. Every company will have to have a bring your own device program if they want personal devices to be used. And those personal devices will need to be registered, because otherwise, how would you know the identity of that device, right? So that was a pretty significant change. The consistent configuration of systems, including workstations, that means everything needs to be managed, everything needs to be hardened. There needs to be a standard of hardening for those systems that needs to be established, and they all need to be measured to that standard and make sure that they are in compliance with that standard. That's a pretty big step for a lot of companies. Even though we've been in the business of doing stronger than the HIPAA security rules security for a long time, we still struggle with this, struggle with maintaining a standard. I mean, every 3 years, there's a new Windows Server operating system that comes out. We have to create a new standard. It's tough to keep up with, and it's difficult to do across all of the different types of devices and servers and computers that you're going to be using in a network. Anti-malware protection. This is funny that it's in here because it was not in the original rule. Anti-malware protection was not a part of the original rule. You had to train about anti-malware protection, but it was not explicitly required that you have anti-malware protection. It was supposedly assumed that you did. They corrected that in this version. Removing extraneous software, so not having things running on your computers that you don't actually need for them to function. That's another part of hardening, right? Removing things that is not required to work. Disabling network ports, that's pretty a common practice. I don't think anybody will have trouble meeting that. Multi-factor authentication, we've all been talking about it several times today. It is one of the most important controls. It is not a silver bullet to stop phishing, but it is a good tool in the toolbox, and it's a very important one to have. I will also say it was one of the hardest things I have ever done in my career. It was the hardest project to get done because you have to consider everything on your network. You have to consider every type of device, every type of person, and how they use your network. It is not an easy lift for those who have not already gotten there. Hopefully, most of us are already somewhere on the road to implementing multi-factor authentication because it is difficult. Vulnerability scanning and penetration testing. I believe that Crystal may have something on this for us as well. This is pretty standard for larger organizations and for organizations that have other regulatory requirements. I'm not surprised that they added it here. I do think it's an important piece. Knowing what your vulnerabilities are is the only way that you can manage them. But for smaller organizations, this is going to be new, and this is going to be an added cost, or at least an added amount of work that they have to do. I believe Crystal will have some information on free resources and government resources that can be used to help with vulnerability scanning, at least. Then network segmentation, making sure that parts of your network that are unsecured or less secured are separate and apart from the parts that contain the crown jewels and the EPHI. And then I mentioned before the backup and recovery control. If you're going to be restoring things within 72 hours, you just have to have different rules around those, and you're going to have different controls. So these are the things that I chose to highlight. There's much more out there, and certainly you can go read the proposed rule for yourself. They go into great detail about the reasons for why they chose to write the rule the way that they did. I'm also available if you want to talk about this. Again, I love talking about the HIPAA security rule. It's been an important part of my life and career. So I look forward to your questions. I also have some resources here on the side. One thing I didn't mention is that that HHS created the healthcare and public health sector cybersecurity performance goals, the CPGs. If you just Google HHS CPGs, you will get to them. This entire rule was written to conform with those CPGs and help organizations meet those CPGs. So again, HPH, so Healthcare and Public Health Cybersecurity Performance Goals. And this is a new effort by HHS to kind of align the industry behind the same goals. And
Thanks.
that's it for my section.
Thanks, Justin. We are holding questions until after Crystal is done, but I just want you to address one thing before we move on. This is a proposed rule and nobody has to abide by any of this just yet. And when might we know something more?
So that's the thing, right? We've had, I don't know if anybody noticed, but we had an administration change since these proposed rules came out. We know that that the current administration is looking at the comments now. They could decide to rescind the whole thing and start over. They could make major modifications to the proposal. We'll just have to wait and see, and we'll have to keep our eyes out for it. And there's no real timeline yet.
Thanks. It's great information to have as a heads up, that's for sure, to let us know what we might be up against, right?
Yes.
Leads us to our last presenter who's going to present for about 20 minutes before we move into the Q&A. So we are keeping track of your questions. Please keep pumping them in there for us. Happy to introduce you to Crystal J. Wilson, who holds a BS in Digital Forensics and is a Cyber State Coordinator for Albany and Region 2 within the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA. She brings over 16 years of work experience with intelligence and cybersecurity and over 20 years with the New York Army National Guard, including a stint in Afghanistan working with special ops. Again, Crystal, we thank you for your service and we're so glad you're here and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So jumping right in, CISA, we just celebrated our 6-year anniversary, so we are still relatively new as far as federal organizations and agencies. Our primary focus is your cybersecurity resiliency and your cybersecurity maturity. So we focus left of boom before an incident happens. We want to make sure that you're as strong as possible and you're as resilient as possible. It's not a case of if something happens, it's a case of when something happens. So preparing ahead of time is our priority and our main focus. Next slide. So there we go again, resiliency and your cybersecurity maturity. So that's very, very similar slide. Next. So CISA Central. So we're stationed all over the United States. We follow the FEMA region. So this is FEMA Region 2, CISA Region 2. So New York, New Jersey, Puerto Rico, U.S. Virgin Islands. CISA Central is our headquarters, and they are down in D.C. Think of them like a SOC. So they run 24/7. They push out vulnerabilities, threat notifications, excuse me, allergies. They also manage all of our services. So our vulnerability scanning, our web application scanning and things like that. So coordination would happen between your local regional advisor and CISA Central. Next slide. So there are 16 critical infrastructures. We are primary on about half of them, and where we aren't, we are secondary. They shift around depending on the year, depending on the threat landscape and what is going on. We also support nonprofits and faith-based organizations. So each year looks different for us. Our priorities this fiscal: water, wastewater, PRC, communications, healthcare is always up there. So it kind of just depends on what our focus is as to our I guess, push for priorities. We still work with all threat sectors throughout each year, regardless of what they are, but it just kind of adjusts how we do things. Next slide. CISA no-cost services. Everything CISA offers is free. In a sense, it's, I guess, prepaid, right? Taxpayer funded. So it's prepaid, but you will never get a bill, an invoice, anything like that. And if you do, please notify your local CSA immediately. For the Albany area, that is me. So we have 2 CSAs upstate, and upstate being probably anything north of Westchester County, but it's me from about Kingston all the way to Canada and out to Syracuse, and then from Syracuse further west, we have our Buffalo CSA who are out there. So we can get split up throughout the state. But yeah, if you ever get anything, please notify us immediately. Everything we offer is free. So the services, the main ones that we will talk about will be the vulnerability scanning, web application scanning, cyber exercises, and there are various services that are also invite only. It depends on, the fiscal year, how many slots we have, because everything we do offer is free. It's very we're resource constrained in a situation like remote pen testing. Everyone wants one, of course, and if you try to get it done in the private sector, it costs tens of thousands of dollars. So services like that would be invite only, and it would be something that our priority sectors would get each year. It really depends. So yeah, next slide. So Cybersecurity Advisor Program. So I'm a CSA, a Cybersecurity Advisor. Here's what I do on paper. The most important thing of my day is building and initiating relationships and connections. I network constantly. I was out for about 4 weeks working on a National Guard deployment. So it's been quite a few hours spent trying to get back through my inbox and my emails because I spend a lot of time talking and connecting with people. So I'm also dual hatted as a cyber state coordinator. So I work directly with New York State government, governor's office, all of the counties, and things like that. So kind of consider me that connection from not only the federal government, but if you don't have a connection with the state government or some organization, you can always reach out to me and I can facilitate that connection. Next slide. So CSET, the Cybersecurity Evaluation Tool. This tool houses all of our assessments. They're all question and answer based. So the tool can be downloaded from GitLab, and it doesn't require an internet connection once it's downloaded. There are no sensors. It doesn't reach out and communicate to us. It's hosted locally. And like I said, all of our assessments are in there. So you can go in and take any of the assessments that you would like. You can have your local CSA help facilitate it with your organization. So it's a lot of kind of, like I said, what you bring to the answers is what you're going to get out of it. So as long as you're coming in with all the information, it's going to print out a report or give you a report at the end, and it will show you where you rate. It will show you, hey, here's where you did a really good job. Here's where you need to make some improvements. And it gives this report with graphs for executives to look very quickly and say, oh, okay, here's where we need to spend our focus, or here's where we need to, try to allocate a little bit more budget in this section. So it's a really great tool. There's a lot of assessments in there, and I definitely recommend poking around. Next slide. So vulnerability scanning. This is something I get questioned about a lot. Assessa offers a free vulnerability scanning service. They scan once a week. You receive a password protected report, and it gives you your vulnerabilities, your critical vulnerabilities. If anything is discovered, a new CV comes out, a new KEV is input into our database. If it's critical, they try to notify you within 12 hours. High is 24. If nothing is new, you get your password protected report every 7 days. Excuse me. This is probably the fastest service to get kicked off. You let me know that you're interested. I send you an email. I need a few key pieces of information. I make that connection with CISA Central, and then they send you a couple of documents. One legal document saying, hey, we give you permission to scan our network, and the other is basically your IP range. It's not any more invasive than normal network traffic, so it's not going to bog down your network. It's not credentialed scanning. We're not trying to break into your network. It's just what you look like from an attacker's perspective. What devices you have touching the network. If there are devices popping up that aren't supposed to be touching the network, that's a really great feature as well. So I always recommend this. If you're doing scanning internally, that's great. This is a really great supplement. We do have a few instances where we have found vulnerabilities that a paid service didn't find. we only have had it happen 3 times, but we're very proud of those 3 times. So this is a really great supplement. And as long as we're using different platforms, then it's not anything that's redundant. Next slide. Excuse me. Cyber Essentials. So if you've not poked around on CISA.gov, there's a ton of information, constantly getting updated. This is something they call a slick sheet, this IT professionals guide. So it puts a lot of information in one place. We've had some stakeholders, print them out, turn them into mouse pads. For those of us in the IT world, backup data, multi-factor authentication, patch and update management is something we are going to be speaking about for decades to come, because it's incredibly important. And these days, threat actors aren't necessarily coming in with incredibly sophisticated and curated payloads. They are exploiting, common vulnerabilities, or things that you didn't know, like someone spoke about earlier, RDP being open and it shouldn't be. So it's more so these days of getting the information out there, making sure we're looking at our environment, making sure we're following best practices, and then having those, at least annual audits of our networks, and things like that. So education is a really big portion of this. So CISA.gov has a ton of information, and I highly recommend everyone poking around there. Next slide. Cyber exercises and planning. Another very powerful tool. Tabletops, or TTXs, if you're familiar with that phrase. This is something that we are able to help curate to your environment. So there is the CISA tabletop exercise packages, so CTEP. These are things that we have pulled from real world experiences, kind of stripped down the data that identifies it to a specific organization and allows you to pull it down and use it with your organization. So say you want something like, phishing to malware to ransomware. There's something in there for it. You pull it down, you curate it and kind of make it make sense to your environment. And then you can run your own tabletop, or, you can have us come in and facilitate this tabletop. So this is something that's incredibly powerful. We have myself being the cybersecurity advisor. We also have protective security advisors, so PSAs. They handle all things physical. So they manage the physical safety of your environments. They can run active shooter training, insider threat training, various workshops kind of discussing, the importance of why we have cameras, or what what other physical control aspects you can put into strengthen the safety of your facilities. So we can also take cyber aspect and a physical aspect and put them together into one exercise. We get everyone at the table. We have the executives, IT, HR, finance, public affairs. We pull everyone together and we test your IR plan. We test your DRP. We test all of these things that you have into place and show you exactly what can happen in a situation, that we see in the real world every day. So a lot of the times, the important piece here is explaining the why. We don't necessarily, or I should say, not everyone necessarily understands the technical piece. So it makes it easier to say, hey, if we don't, flex our budget to procure this specific piece of, or I should say this capability to protect our network, here's what could happen, and here's exactly how detrimental it could be to us. So it helps bridge that gap of the technical aspect to, the decision makers, the budget makers. So again, a very powerful tool. I highly recommend everyone going through a TTX at least once a year, if possible, if not every other year. Next slide. StopRansomware.gov. At this point, I'm basically contractually obligated to talk about this site. Ransomware is rampant. It is not going anywhere. It is only getting worse. And like I said before, the payloads are not coming in sophisticated. Things are being targeted that are common vulnerabilities and that can be exploited, and threat actors will sit in your network for months and you have absolutely no idea what's going on. So this website has a ton of information, different mitigations, best practices, ransomware alerts, different threat actor alerts. We've ported a lot of it over to cisa.gov/stop-ransomware also. So both places, ton of information. Highly recommend poking around here as well. Next slide. I know that was a lot of information and I definitely talk fast. So if there are any questions, like they said, please put them in the chat and we will address them. But for now, that is all for me.
Crystal, thank you so much. Can you send some of that energy my way, please? Please. My association colleagues have been gathering the questions from the chat. I think we only had a few that we didn't address. So Becky, Eva, Al. Can you go back one slide, please? Go back to the questions slide. Thank you.
Hi, Carol, this is Becky, and this was a couple of questions really for Jason on his HIPAA presentation.
Justin.
I'm sorry, I can't
Okay.
read my own writing. Justin, do you have a template available that an individual can use to follow the ruling?
So I posted in the chat the fact sheet that came from HHS OCR regarding the new NPRM. It's pretty straightforward. It also links to the actual proposed rule if you want more details. And it is bulleted information, so it's pretty easy to absorb. And my slides were based on that fact sheet, so that's what we have right now. There was also a question about I don't know, when we're looking at things that we need to build towards, there is I put in the chat the HHS 405D healthcare industry and cybersecurity practices. 405D was the part of OCR, I'm sorry, about a part of HHS that was made to align our cybersecurity posture as an industry. It is not a regulatory body, it is an advisory one. And one of the things that they did was they surveyed the organizations and they found what other people in the industry are doing. If you want to help build towards recognized security practices, which is a high-tech act term, meaning that the government will recognize this particular set of security controls as standard practices for the purposes of audits and other things. If you're building towards the 405D, it is a recognized security practice, and that's a good place to start. And this one really is scalable because they have recommendations. They have not recommendations. They're not recommendations. They're explaining what the practices are for small, medium, and large organizations. And I think this is a very valuable resource. My organization, as a large organization, uses this as a measuring stick for ourselves and trying to build towards those practices. Like I said, it's not a requirement. It's not part of the security rule per se, but it is a recognized security practice under the High-Tech Act, which will give us some safe harbor if you're at least using it as a measuring stick, right?
That's a really great resource. And I want to let attendees know that we are going to do our best to gather all of these resources from the chat and put them in the email that's going to go out to you after the presentation. So you won't lose them when you drop off the meeting, even though you're staying to the end. You won't lose those. We're gathering them for you. Becky, was there one? There was a question.
Yes.
Something.
Justin, also to the back to the HIPAA rule is can an agency use their cloud-based EMR, or is it anticipated that they can use their cloud-based EMR to perform the functions of the audit? Do you think that'll be allowed?
So remember that the EMR is a business associate and they are responsible they're responsible for following the HIPAA rules as well. But that does not preclude us from having to follow the exact same HIPAA rules ourselves. And there are administrative requirements here. And remember, I said that the administrative requirements are the biggest burden for small, for smaller healthcare providers and for big ones, but big ones often have to do it for other reasons. The smaller healthcare providers are still required to follow the HIPAA security rule, and these new changes that are proposed, if they become part of the final rule, will be the responsibility of the covered entity first, and the business associate second. So the question is, can they perform the audit? They probably are performing audits on their own systems, and they are doing it for themselves, but you have to assure OCR in the event of a breach or an investigation or an audit that that you are following the rule. And that might mean something different if a lot of it is outsourced, but you still have to have that documented.
Great. Thanks. Did we have one?
And I looked up because I saw this question in the list, I looked up the audit requirement. It does not have to be a external audit. It can be an internal audit if you have a separate internal function, but your IT department can't do an audit of itself. So it has to be an audit done by an independent body, even if it's an internal body.
Okay. Great. Thank you, guys. Were there any questions for any of the other presenters? Eva, Becky, Al, anybody?
The
Yes.
only other thing I just want to revisit, Justin, is the HIPAA rule, the calendar for the HIPAA rule in terms of finalization. Is there a proposed final date on comments and review? I know it's still under review and still in the
The
comment
only
period.
thing that I have heard is that they are currently reviewing the comments, which means that they haven't forgotten about it. And they haven't decided to not move forward, at least not yet. So the normal timeline, I think, on this would be after and again, I'm not the best at knowing exactly when these things happen, but I think with the normal timeline is like 180 days from the time a final rule is published until the implementation date. If I recall, the original 2004 rule, they gave a full year for compliance. And they may set, a staggered rollout of this as well. That's something that they could do. So we don't really know the timeline until the final rule is published. But now we're already through the comment period, so we should expect something within the next few months.
Thanks, Justin. And thank you to all of our speakers, Crystal, Dennis, Justin. Such a ton of information. I hope you will stay on the line just for a little while longer. We're going to, Eva, I think, is going to come and start off our updates for us. The associations have just a few general emergency management updates to give you, and then we'll open it up to talk about any emergency management thing anybody wants to talk about. Eva?
Okay, next
Next
slide,
slide.
please.
Thanks.
All right, one more. Very good. Okay, so I have the easy updates, and that is I am going to update you on the the SEMP first. And the SEMP is the Comprehensive Emergency Management Plan that the associations, in conjunction with the Department of Health, worked very hard on not too long ago, maybe 2 or 3 years. I just want to remind you that it is there. It is in the learning management system, in the DOH learning management system. It is course number or course OHAP-BP5-SEMP. And you can look for either the hospice or the home care SEMP. You can download instructions, plan templates, and a toolkit for home care and hospice providers. We worked really hard on that. We want to remind you that it's in there. The other thing about the what I also wanted to tell you about the health commerce system is that it has gone to multi-factor authentication. Be prepared for that and be looking for that, and that should not surprise us, correct?
Right.
All right, next slide. That
Okay.
would be Al.
Nope.
Nope, Carol.
Carol, help
There we go,
out.
Carol.
No problem. Just real quick, everybody knows that measles is happening in the United States. We are still at 4 cases in New York State, with 3 of those happening in New York City. So fortunately, our numbers here are not going up, but numbers are rising in Ontario, our neighbor, and cases are reported in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. And just this morning, the New York State Department of Health issued a travel advisory in light of these numbers, to remind New Yorkers that, we're only a car ride away from a measles outbreak. So we need to protect ourselves by getting vaccinated. About 90% of unvaccinated individuals will get infected if they're exposed. Measles is a highly, highly contagious disease, and it can be dangerous, and it can lead to death, as we know and we've seen just in the last few months. I do want to let our home care providers know that HCP was in contact with the New York State Department of Health and the Division of Vaccine Excellence regarding new hires and what you need to do for MMR vaccinations for new hires. As you know, every new hire needs to be vaccinated against the measles, and the regs state 2 doses. If you have someone that does not have an immunization record, you can send them for a titer, and that covers you for the hiring as long as their titer shows that they've been vaccinated. In the case of an inconclusive titer or a negative titer, you are allowed to let a home health aide, a personal care aide, work with patients after 1 dose of the MMR. What you need to do is get a medical exemption, because technically they cannot get a second dose for 4 weeks. So according to the Center for Vaccine Excellence, it is a valid medical exemption from the doctor that says they can't get the second vaccine for 4 weeks, and that's what they work under for 4 weeks until they get their second shot. And that is all I have on measles. I just want to quickly talk about bird flu. There has been 0 human-to-human transmission reported. CDC is watching this closely. As you know, it's affecting our egg prices and affecting a lot of our livestock. 70 cases have been reported since last April, but only 3, and all of those, except for a couple, were linked to infection from animals, not from humans. And only 1 death has been reported so far. Just to finish up, influenza, still prevalent in New York State. Health Commissioner has declared flu prevalent, has not rescinded that. So you still need to follow all the regs for home care with vaccinating your staff or wearing a mask, and document that. The annual healthcare personnel flu report will be out probably in the next month or so. It's usually due the end of June. It is not out yet. So keep documenting and keep protecting folks, because flu is still geographically prevalent, widespread in New York State. And that's what we have for quick updates, because then we get to, oh, Al, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry, Al.
No problem. Thank you, Carol. So I think what I'm going to do, because as you can tell, this is sort of tracking and reinforcing on the comments Justin made. And Justin, thank you so much for your remarks, and all panelists. I just put in the chat what is a letter that was sent by the Alliance for Care at Home, which really nationally represents all forms of in-home care, including hospice services. And this was a letter that was sent in response to the HIPAA rule that Justin really described in detail. In the letter, really the focus is on the impracticality, in many cases, the lack of feasibility of the time frame in which these changes would have to be produced. The challenges in the capability of providers, even large providers, to make something like this happen. The cost, which ranges, are so significant. I have an analysis, a comparative cost analysis that was conducted, for what would be characterized as small providers. The impact could be upwards of $500,000 for a mid-sized provider.
How do I pick that up? I don't even know how. I always hang up.
For a mid-sized provider, upwards of $3 million. For what would be considered a larger provider, upwards of $20 million. And what would be considered an enterprise provider, I'm assuming, multi-state, large corporate backing, over $20 million. So we're talking regardless, we're talking about significant costs associated with this. Justin really emphasized the administrative burden that would be associated with this. And that is also really, really very key. By and large, organizations are still trying to recover from COVID, the impact on the the workforce from COVID, and the fiscal impact and the operational. So, adding something that's this significant, regardless of merit, has to be carefully considered in terms of the timetables and other requirements. There's also elements of practicality. So one of the items that you'll see covered in the letter relates to like dual authentication and then rural areas. So just imagine how difficult it already is to establish connections in rural areas. But now if you have to do the multi-factor authentication, it only compounds the issues and the challenges for clinicians who are making visits and doing the work in that area. And I think in the final analysis is really the question of the cost benefit of the proposal as it's been laid out. With the aspiration to try to work with HHS on reframing this to really, try to bring it in a line. I think Justin mentioned already that the due date for the comments was March 7th. HHS is wading through thousands of them. We don't really know what's at the far end of that in terms of the exact, the wrap up of that and then the next phase of response. And also because, you have the change in administrations because this rule was issued under the prior one. So a lot that is unknown going forward. But I guess what we do know, based on what's been put out there in the proposal, is that it is very extensive. And for whatever comes next, a lot of preparation is going to be needed. It is certainly in our plans to work with and support the industry in that response. Just one last item. I didn't get the chance to raise my question during the time. I just missed the window, and then we moved on. So in our post world here in the last period of time, if there is an opportunity, I did have a question that I wanted to ask really across all the panelists. But Carol, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you.
No, what you said you had a question. I'm sorry, I was reading the chat while you were talking because I thought you were going to ask your question.
Okay, well, I will then. I just didn't want to jump the process if there were others that wanted to.
No, ask your question, and then we're opening it up to any emergency management topic. So please.
Very good then. So my question for all the panelists is that, in the evolving healthcare system, we are certainly moving, in some cases moving very rapidly from the services that we provide in each of our respective settings, our respective provider type or program types of organizations, but really the system is more and more evolving to a more integrated model. And even before you get to integration is really extensive collaboration between provider types. With that, you have the exchange of information, you have increased vulnerability as more and more technology is used in the context of point of care service, or simply health information exchange. And I just wondered from the perspective of the panelists, and this could be for everybody, so be interested in hearing everybody's response or anybody's individually, what is your perspective on how that, that aspect of collaboration and that level of close work has an impact on the various areas that you discussed?
So the question is, how does the integration and the collaboration?
Yeah, the movement toward collaborative work. How does it? I'll give an example.
How does that affect our cybersecurity posture?
Exactly. Yeah, right. Exactly.
Right. So a long time ago, we all sat behind firewalls and in our data centers or in our corporate offices, and we put a lot of we put a lot of resources at the edge to keep things out of that perimeter, right? But now that perimeter doesn't exist, and perhaps for home care and hospice especially, it never really existed because we were already leaving that safety to go out into the world and work in people's homes, to work across mobile networks and things like that. I think that as the communication between providers and plans, providers and other providers, and the interoperability requirements that we have now for sharing that information have progressed, that just makes that perimeter even more Swiss cheese. And it does bring with it a whole new set of vulnerabilities that we have to consider as part of our risk assessments and consider as part of our security posture. The result is that the attack surface is much larger for things that most people don't even think about. Like, we all know phishing, we all know those kinds of things that we train on that affect the end user, but this is really the stuff that makes systems talk to systems. And a lot of times that is where we introduce new types of vulnerabilities that could be exploited by bad actors. I think that the thing that I've seen the biggest growth in my areas has been for homegrown applications and for homegrown interoperability platforms. Just being really diligent about the development of those, making sure that you have secure development of those, that you have secure development practices within your organization, or that you're using a vendor or a consultant that uses those practices. You have to have a very strong third-party security assessment program. So knowing when you're hiring a new vendor, do you do a security review of their services and what they bring, and even doing periodic reviews of those over time, because they change over time. We have a pretty strong third-party security risk management program that we've implemented so that we can periodically look at each of those, and it's all based on risk. It's all based on what we find as we do those assessments, and we try to scale it so that we don't treat all vendors exactly the same from a risk management standpoint. That's the biggest things that I've seen is around development and around third-party management. Anybody else? Dennis, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I agree with everything you've said there. And third-party risk, I'll give you another spin. Sitting down with the health system, talking about their security and their third-party security for people that they're trying to do interoperability with. And every time you add another vendor, it adds a level of complexity for that integration, unless you're using a third-party integration. But what they were actually planning to use their risk assessments of the third parties to decide which ones they're going to whittle out. So they had 20 external vendors and they wanted to get down to 12. And they were doing cyber audits on those companies. And now those companies are going to get shut out of providing services because they were perceived as one, too expensive to work with and too much risk to deal with. And just, dealing with less vendors is more popular. And was an interesting twist on using cyber to optimize business.
Yeah, New York State is actually requiring this of health plans. So I can imagine this becoming some kind of requirement in the future for providers as well.
I think one of
Although
the
I haven't seen that anywhere. I can imagine that that's where we're going.
Just maybe a thought to punctuate our conversation is just that, at the very time when collaborative models are being encouraged, even the social care networks, integration of health and mental health, all those kinds of components are all impaired by the risk factor. And again, I think we've all seen circumstances where there's a timidity, justifiable, but a timidity in trying to reach out and make these connections, which ultimately are about the functionality of the healthcare system, to be able to make those connections because of the concerns on the cyber side. So thank you very much for your comments on that, and I appreciate the chance to have.
And I would say that is that was the whole purpose of HIPAA, the portability and accountability, right? was that we would be able to eventually do this. And now that we're getting here, we're realizing how important cybersecurity is for that.
Yeah, it's huge. It's a great topic. We had a lot of participants too. I do just want to address a couple of the open, unrelated topics that were in the chat. If I could, there was one question about vaccines, and I need to check with the Center for Vaccine Excellence. If the person that asked that would like to email me, that would be great, because then I could get a definite answer from the Department of Health. Someone asked for an OHIP address. OHIP is Office of Health Insurance Programs. So I'm not sure what you need. If you want to let me know, what if it's an emergency management that you're looking for, and it's so many acronyms, it's hard to keep them straight. And then the for everyone would be interested to know how to get alerts when if they're not getting an alert for a certain area. New York Alert is a great tool. You can get alerts for anywhere in New York State. You can get alerts for only certain hazards and not other hazards. I see it's one of our resources on our resource slide at the end. The other thing is, Eva is my friend when she says, know your neighbors, right? Know your neighbors on the sunny day. So you can always call public health in that county that you're looking to get stuff for, and let them know that you're there, and let them know that you want to be on their notification list. It's important to know your local folks. Eva, you want to add anything?
No, I'm good. I'm just very
Oh,
grateful
Becky.
to everyone. We're all good.
Becky, too, you want to pop up and
All good. All
say
good here.
goodbye?
Thank you.
Is there any other questions? We have about 4 minutes. I don't think so. This was a lot to digest. Well, thank you to all of our speakers, and thank you, Fidel Monroe. We do want to make sure you do the evaluation for this presentation, because your feedback drives our programming. Like Fidel said, we did an assessment to find out what you need, and now this is the way of furthering that assessment to let us know what you need now and what was useful and what wasn't useful, so that we can provide the programs that you need. We don't want to waste anybody's time or dollars. So please do fill out the evaluation, and you'll get a follow-up email with the evaluation as well. But if you click on it now, open that phone, do it now. That way we have a ton of responses.
So Carol, one thing maybe just to add just toward the here in the conclusion too. One thing that would be I think helpful would be to know hear from you on the challenges that you see. I mean so part of this presentation is to describe some of the issues at hand, resources at hand, potential directions. But I think what we always benefit from is hearing where the challenges are and where that assistance on our part as as associations and as collaborators with New York City and in fact the incredible panel that you heard is trying to determine how best might we be able to work together on these challenges, but or assist you directly with them. So definitely invite you to be in touch with us on that, and we look forward to being able to be helpful.
That's a great point, Al. Thank you. And I think we'll call it a day. Hopefully everybody got the information, and we'll all be in that follow-up email.
And thanks again to New York City, Fidel, and your whole team for the support for the entire project and the work that we all do.
You're welcome. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you to the
Thank you.
presenter.
Have a good afternoon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.